Today we're unboxing an iPhone 5S that will either be running iOS 7 or iOS 8. You guys will know what version it's running by the title of the video. But the eBay listing for this item only showed the slide to set up screen. And from that I could identify that this is using the older style Helvetica Neue font that Apple only used through iOS 8. So I'm definitely hoping for this device's original version, iOS 7, but I'll still be happy if it's running iOS 8. Let's go ahead and get it opened up. And here we have our iPhone 5S. This is in the gold color option. It appears to be in decent condition so far, it's just really dirty. So I'll take a quick second to get it cleaned up. And there we go, the iPhone 5S is looking so much better after that cleaning. Let's get it powered up now. And there we go, this is the setup screen that I saw in the listing photos. So let's go through this and find out if we're actually running iOS 7. And there we go, we are met with the iOS 8 home screen. So a slight disappointment that it's not iOS 7. But at least this does appear to be an earlier version of iOS 8, which I can tell by the red music icon here. This was only used through iOS 8.3. It was replaced with a white icon in iOS 8.4 with the launch of Apple Music. But another trick to see which version of iOS 8 we have is whether or not there's an Apple Watch application on the home screen. And I do not see that application here. I believe that launched in iOS 8.2, so we should definitely have an 8.1 version. We can also tell that this is not an 8.0 version of iOS 8 by the pages on this iBooks app. These are curled upward, where on the 8.0 versions the pages had a more flat look. So if I had to guess, I'd say we're running 8.1 through 8.1.3. Let's jump into settings so we can confirm. And okay, we do have 8.1.3 here. Also, this is the base 16GB storage configuration. So now let's take a second to talk about what the iPhone 5S was. This model was released in September 2013 alongside the iPhone 5C. And that was pretty significant because it was Apple's first time releasing two new iPhones at once. The 5S was a pretty predictable upgrade over the previous year's iPhone 5. And while the iPhone 5C appeared to be something all new, it was really just an iPhone 5 from last year in a plastic housing. Even though the 5C is pretty cool to look back on, it really does go down in history as being one of the worst iPhones ever made. It was only $100 cheaper than the 5S, and there were so many trade-offs. As you can see here, the iPhone 5S used mostly the same design as the iPhone 5. So it was using aluminum and glass finished with these diamond chamfered edges. And this design is really nice. It goes down in history as being one of the most beautiful iPhones ever made. And especially so here in the gold color option that was new for the 5S. Aside from the new gold color, you could also go for the classic silver. There was also a new space gray color that was replacing the outgoing slate. As you can see here, the slate colored iPhone 5 had a pretty bad tendency to chip. So once this dark color would come off, it would reveal the silver underneath. So the much lighter shade of space gray on the 5S held up way better. The 5S here was still using a 4-inch display, and that was definitely getting to be a bit small for the time. But as we know, Apple would finally give us a large screen iPhone just 1 year after the 5S with the 6 and 6 Plus. The 5S here got a really impressive set of upgrades over the iPhone 5. The first of which was a brand new processor with the dual-core A7 chip. The clock speed on that was around 1.3 gigahertz, and it was really impressive because it was the first 64-bit chip to ever go in a smartphone. Not only was that just impressive on paper, it made for a 2x speed improvement in CPU and GPU compared to the A6. It was still paired to the same amount of RAM though, so you got 1 gigabyte. Another huge feature for the 5S was the Touch ID fingerprint sensor on the home button. So this model ditched the classic iPhone home button with the square. And Touch ID really helped users save so much time daily from typing in their iPhone password over and over again. Let's go through the setup here just for some nostalgia. Touch ID seems really basic and common now, but I remember back in 2013 it absolutely felt like something from the future. I believe you could add up to 5 fingerprints. You could also rename them. And in case you forgot which fingerprints were registered, you could rest one on the sensor while in this settings screen and the device would highlight it. So now let's see the sensor in action. And as you can see, that Touch ID sensor works pretty seamlessly and quickly. We did end up getting a faster Touch ID with the iPhone 6s in 2015. But honestly, the first generation sensor here was still really fast, and it's super cool to take a look at the first model that had it. The 5S also made some upgrades to the camera. It was still an 8 megapixel sensor, but it now had a larger aperture and there was a slow-mo video feature. So this would record 720p at 120 frames per second. There was also now a burst mode for the camera. And the rear-facing flash was now something that Apple called a True Tone flash. So that was basically a dual-tone flash with amber and white elements. And the camera here for the 5S just kind of had a revised look with not as many of these metal rings that the iPhone 5 had. And another point about the design is that the iPhone font printed on the back was now significantly thinner. You could get the 5S here with 16, 32, or 64 gigabytes of storage. And this model was sold all the way until March of 2016 when it was replaced with the first generation iPhone SE. That model pretty much shared the exact design from the 5S here, and that was significant because many customers still preferred this 4-inch form factor. And the 5S got a really nice amount of software support through iOS 12 in 2018. That version even received security updates many years past that, so if you had one of these that was updated, it was usable for a very long time. And now for the section of the video where I usually talk about the device's original version. I'm going to bring in another 5S I have here that is actually running its original version, iOS 7. So iOS 7 brought a huge visual redesign compared to its predecessor, iOS 6. As you can see, the more old school skeuomorphic design was replaced with a very flat and modern look. So of course that was carried over to iOS 8 with very little visual changes. There was a lot of transparency for these versions, as well as an effect called parallax. So basically the wallpaper and icons would slightly move when you would tilt your device. And that kind of gave you an impression that the content was almost floating. One big feature for these versions was Control Center. So the look was a little bit different between iOS 7 and 8. But it was really cool to have all of these controls available with just a swipe. Especially this flashlight control. I remember before this you would have to download a separate flashlight application from the App Store. There was also now a much improved multitasking interface for these versions. So you would get these full screen previews of your applications. And closing them out was as simple as swiping upward. On iOS 8, you had a small difference with your recent contacts appearing across the top. With iOS 6, multitasking was a pretty big pain point, so you would only receive previews of the app icon. And closing them out was really slow and tedious. You first had to hold down on them until they would go into this wiggle mode. And then you had to press these really small minus buttons that you would oftentimes miss. Also, iOS 7 brought us the really convenient swipe back feature. That was nice in applications like Settings and Safari to quickly go back in a more natural way. With iOS 6, that was not available. You would always have to reach up here and press the back button manually. Now we'll take a look at some of the system services with iOS 8. So first we'll do Siri. What's the weather like in California?
It's currently clear and 84 degrees in Sacramento, California.
Show me MLB scores for today.
There are 15 MLB games for today.
So Siri is working with no problem on iOS 8. Also, the App Store works on this version. iOS 8 is currently the oldest release where you are able to natively sign in and download applications. So I just grabbed a few nostalgic games here. I was pretty limited with the 16 gigabytes of storage. But in a way, it is nice to have this device on iOS 8 because the App Store does not natively work on iOS 7. So here's what the App Store looks like when it loads. I also did sync some music to this device because we are running a version older than iOS 8.4. And that's especially important because these older versions still had cover flow. And that was Apple's neat little view to browse through all of your music albums quickly. This particular view was exclusive to iOS 7 and 8. So you can pinch inward and outward to see more or less albums. And once you found one you like, just simply click it to access the songs inside. This feature was sadly removed with iOS 8.4. And now let's check out the wallpapers here with iOS 8. So if you watch the channel a lot, you may have heard me say this before, but this is my absolute favorite selection of wallpapers for any legacy iOS version. There are over 40 choices here to choose from, and I just think they all look so good. So you got a lot of new nature themed choices for iOS 8, but there were also a ton of carryovers from iOS 7. That version had some more abstract choices as well as even more nature choices and space themed images. So this was the default for iOS 7. And of course this is the default for iOS 8. This one is pretty cool too. This was used for the iOS 8 beta versions. And that's another reason why I did not mind to have this 5S here running iOS 8. As when the iOS 8 beta came out in summer 2014, this was the newest iPhone at the time. So obviously the iOS 8 betas were showcased on the 5S. So in that slightly distant way, iOS 8 feels really fitting on this device. And I think for the rest of the video, I will set this wallpaper. Aside from these stills here though, we also had this dynamic category. These were new back with iOS 7, and they would basically give you these bokeh dots that would move when you would tilt your device. But that pretty much brings me to the conclusion of this video. I am really thrilled to finally have a gold 5S in my collection. I had always held off on picking one of these up because I was really waiting for one on iOS 7. And although we do not quite have that here, it's still really cool to have this one on iOS 8. So be sure to leave me a comment below with your thoughts on the iPhone 5S as well as iOS 8. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.